Okay, folks, we're back. We're going into painting our abstract compositions. Now, remember, for this project, what you need to do is compose a full-scale 9 by 12 abstract composition that is in relation or have some relationship to your still art painting. And in the last video, I composed 4 different examples of how I might think about abstraction. And certainly you can take that and expand upon it or invent a new process, as long as you can discuss or write about how you made that connection between the two. And again, have a planned out approach. Don't just go for it, okay? Very few of us can just go for it and make something great, right? You need to carefully go through the steps. And certainly practice working your sketchbook on a scrap piece of paper, test out some studies. Let's go into what we're going to talk about today. All right, so I've got painting here, the little still life that I started working on. And remember, this one I was just sort of breaking down shapes that I felt like were appropriate and straying from those shapes a little bit to make some sort of compositional start. So with this, what I thought would be interesting is to try to use kind of the opposite colors, right? Now you may be able to take a photo and using an application of some sort, an imaging application, simply invert the colors and take a look at it. Certainly play around with digital technology to use as a resource for this. I'm just going to use a color wheel though for mine because I can look at this and reference what I might go for. So for example, the background is mostly green, so I'll just go across and use the complement of red. Interior of the bottle, the liquid is mostly violet, so I'll use a yellow. The blue glove, I'll use orange. And then the shell, I'll play around with a little bit. It's got some kind of like muted orange and muted blues, which I'll flip-flop back and forth a little bit. And then I'll take some liberties beyond that as well. So to start with, you know, I'm just going to clean my palette a little bit and start with that red background, right? So again, using the complementary color scheme, I've devised a system. So my system that I can write about is, you know, I mimicked the composition and the shapes, but reduced the forms to more geometric shapes, and then used complementary colors to paint in my background scene, or paint in the whole scene actually, right? So let's mix up some red, and I'll fast forward this so you can see what I'm going to work with. Okay, so you can see that I've got a start on this abstract composition. I've flipped colors a bit, so you know where the violet of the interior of the bottle is, I've made more of an orangey yellow. Where the gloves are, I've shifted blue into more of an orange sienna, and I played around with the background. And then now I'm taking some liberties with color, adding in some green in places, trying to balance it out. So you know, this is maybe 25% done. I'll keep working on it and make it more effective, more interesting, and go into it in a little bit. So I'll work on a few more of these and talk about what I've done. All right, folks, you can see that I've done some development here. What I'm doing with my diagonal grid is simply just looking for areas and adding some color. And I'm playing around with different values in colors, so you can, I'm not sticking to the same color for everything here, right? I'm switching up the different violets and different combinations, lighter, darker, more red, more blue. Same with the blue down here. I'll work into areas of the shell. And so I'm using this as more of a pixelated approach where I'm approximating where colors would be based on the composition form of this, but sticking to this grid system, right? So that's another way of thinking about color, thinking about an abstraction that has a relationship between these two and ways that you can move into it further. Okay, folks, this next one here, what I thought about doing was adding a different medium to it as well. So you can experiment and bring in other pencils, crayons, markers, other things like that if you want to as well. Definitely use watercolor paint. But with this, what I'm gonna do is I have this white colored pencil that I found, just a little bit left. And I'm just going through and kind of like coloring in pretty hard so it makes a waxy surface. And my in just certain areas where there's some overlaps. So my strategy with this, what I'm going to do is, let me go color this too, is I'm just going to use really thin washes and kind of layer upon layer upon layer. So make this almost look like kind of layers of stained glass. And I'm not going to even worry about matching color. I'm just going to kind of have fun with this one, right? So again, what I'll do is just use a little bit bigger brush, and I've already got some color going on the palette, so I'll play around with that. Maybe I'll take this kind of acidy green to begin with, a little more yellow into it. And I'm going to keep my colors, again, pretty watery and thin, and I'm going to let them dry in between. So, and then when I apply this, you'll see that the paint doesn't want to stick too well to the colored pencil, which is kind of neat. This is sort of like, elementary school techniques, but those things that we learn when we're tinies, they can play out later on when we make more sophisticated art. Maybe it's not even more sophisticated, I don't know. But anyway, the white is kind of resisting the paint, which I like, so I'm going to keep that moving through. And again, what I'm going to do with each one of these is just with those tracing shapes, I'm just going to put in thin washes of color, working one kind of piece at a time to see what it will do. And then I'll let it dry, I'll layer over, I'll do another one, kind of work back and forth in that direction. And that will be the process for this piece. The idea of thin washes adding up to a larger composition. Okay, while I wait for that one to dry and layer over again, I'm going to work on this one. And for this, I'm just going to use some painting techniques with this masking motion. So first, I'm just going to go and kind of paint in the areas. Use your fingernail and really press down the tape. So it might run under a little bit, which is okay. But try to avoid that as much as you can. Try not to puddle too much next to the edges as well, because that will lead to bleeding. But in this case, what I can do is just paint in an area, wait for it to dry, lift it up, and do it again and again and again. Okay, so I've got these dry now, and I'm just going to lift them up and see what it is they look like underneath. So basically, just going to lift up an edge, slowly peel it back kind of parallel to the page, and you can see I'm getting a nice shape that's happening there. And then let's see if I peel this one up this direction. If you're careful, you can save these things. So this one's stuck a little bit more, but that's all right. I'm going to lift this way. Again, parallel, okay. And finally, this one. Okay, so that's pretty interesting, definitely a different feel and look. I think I would go further and add more shapes and more layers and kind of build this up. But this is, essentially what I'm looking for. None of these are done, but I want to give you an overview of kind of what we're thinking about, right? So essentially, the goal of the project is to examine your finished still life, figure out a way to compose it that has a relationship, right? It could be, very, similarly composed objects that are basically the same shape, but broken down, reduced to form geometrically. You could trace objects in different combinations to make a similar composition or even strain from that. You could use some sort of system, a grid system, a dot system, other kind of system that you may be able to invent and use color accordingly. You can use masking techniques. And finally, other materials are fine. Going back in and drawing into this, if I were to go into this now, kind of reconfirm those lines with some dark pencil over the top, to really give it a more of a graphic kind of look, which could be really great. So don't feel like this has to be so strict in terms of materials. I do want you to use paint. I do want you to use color. You can add other materials into it. The goal here is to make something that is exciting, dynamic, and carries a relationship between the two. Ultimately, you'll have two paintings, the same size, and you'll be writing a little bit about the decisions you made and the connections that are between these two pieces. All right. Well, that's it for the overview of abstract painting. Oh, I missed that. Let's do this. There we go. That's all for now. And if you have questions about it, let me know. Feel free to send me some sketch ideas, color samples, anything like that. Again, this should be fun, but ultimately plan it out. Think about your color relationships. Think about your composition. Think about the idea of a reduction of form and the relationship that you have between these two pieces. All right, that's all for now. I'll see you later.